Hi, in this lesson, we'll learn how to control historical data in WealthLab to use for charts, backtests, and even end-of-day trading. We'll cover real-time streaming data in another segment. Okay, this lesson is about data extensions and data extensions. You can find all of the extensions for WealthLab from the extensions page, and just click on any of them that you're interested in. There'll be some information about what it does and some screenshots, change logs. And for example, we're going to install the data extensions extension, which gives you a lot more free access, and some of these are free and paid, I think, but free access to real-time, historic, fundamental, sentiment providers, things that you'll be interested in, like the put-call ratio from the CBOE, things like this. So this is a really useful extension to have. You can download installation files right from the extension page here, but we're going to find that we'll go back to the home page that we saw before in the first lesson. Let's pull it up right now. Okay, there it is. And this is a much more convenient way to install extensions. So what you would do is just select the one that you want. If there's an upgrade, you'll see it in red, and you can just click on it and do the same thing, update or upgrade, and you just click on the upgrade button. This will install the selected updates. So you just click on that. And while that's happening, I'll just you just click through the wizards. All the extensions are, well, that was very quick. So all the extensions are free. Let's go back to the extensions page. All of these extensions are free with the premium subscription of WealthLab, except for the third-party extensions, although the Norgate extension, which we'll mention later here at the bottom, is also free, but Norgate is a paid data service. Okay, let's get WealthLab started again. And now you'll find that the data extensions extension that we just installed is up here. Our build is build 18. The current build that's available on the server is 18, so we're up to date. And after installing the data extensions extension, come over to the data panel and click on the globe icon for the DataSets panel. And you'll notice some extra providers here. Now, the gear icons are auto-managed datasets. You can't change those. But for example, the CBOE provider, you can see, has the put-call ratios. And by the way, another way to open a chart that I missed on the first video is if you double-click on one of these symbols, that'll open a chart and get the data. So I just wanted to mention that. Now, a data set is just a set of symbols. Often, they're grouped by components of an index, holdings in an account, or some other logical grouping, such as financial products of an exchange like the CBOE. As we saw previously, data sets give you a convenient way to pick symbols for charting, but more important, a way to run a backtest on a set of symbols simultaneously. We'll see how later. Now, a handy group of data sets that installed automatically are the world indices that have the constituents of the world's major indices. Except for the US lists, these are linked to the Yahoo provider. So when you click a symbol here, WealthLab requests the data from Yahoo Finance. We'll talk more about linked and unlinked datasets later. Note that if there are any changes to these datasets, the lists will update automatically once each day when you close and reopen WealthLab. And now's a good time to mention a special set of datasets created for WealthLab, the Wealth Data datasets. Wealth Data is free end-of-day data for WealthLab subscribers, and it generally covers the symbols in the NASDAQ 100, S&P 500, and the German DAX indices. Go to wealth-data.com to find out how wealth data is different from other end-of-day data. But I'll point out here that wealth data includes all the listed and delisted symbols back to approximately the year 1995. This gives WealthLab the ability to feed your strategy backtests the symbols at the time they appeared in the index historically. The thing to remember is that when you use a wealth data dataset for backtesting, you get a survivorship-free backtest without making any edits to your code. For complete coverage of US and Australian stock markets with a trouble-free, auto-updated local database with even more survivorship-free lists, including the Russell 3000, check out the Norgate data service. You can find a link in the extensions page for the Norgate provider. Getting back to the datasets tree, a right-click gives you a menu of operations you can do. If you don't use one or more of the auto-managed datasets, it's convenient to hide them. Hiding removes the datasets from the drop-down selectors for backtests, making it easier to choose the datasets that you use more often. At the bottom of the list is a folder of My Datasets. The Crypto DataSet here supports strategies published on the website that require crypto symbols. But when you create new datasets, they go in the My Datasets folder. And we'll do that shortly because you can do all of these operations in the Data Manager too. So let's go there to explain more details about how WealthLab manages data. Okay, there are three ways to open a Data Manager. One is from the navigation bar right here. Click the Data Manager button. And also from the Tools menu, Tools, Data Manager. You can only do it once because there's only one Data Manager. Or the Control-M shortcut that you saw right there. Okay, and the Data Manager has 5 views. The Datasets tree, which is a duplicate of the Dataset panel over here. Although you don't get the symbol drop-downs because when you click on a dataset here, you get all the details of what you've downloaded for that dataset in the scale that you've selected here. Some data providers are only daily providers, like the Wealth Data Provider, so you only get a daily option. We only have Crypto, which also has daily and 60 minutes. You can see the Crypto Compare gives us a 60-minute bar option. So if we click on the 60-minute bars, you can see the data that I've already downloaded for the 60-minute bars for Crypto Compare. Now when you click on a data set, you see you've got some options here. We can create new data sets. Now configure and delete are grayed out here because data sets that are in these, that have the gear icon are auto-managed. So you can't control the symbols in those data sets. You can't delete them, you can't configure them in any way. But for example, you can do that with this crypto data set, which is automatically loaded by WealthLab to support the public strategies. Now you can configure and delete this if you want, but WealthLab is going to auto-generate it again, so don't get discouraged if you do that. But for example, remember that data sets are just lists of symbols, so I could hit configure and I could add another symbol to this data set. Whether or not it's going to be a valid symbol for that data set doesn't matter. So you can see I've got Apple in the crypto data set now. And it doesn't have any bars, but that's okay. And if I tried to update this data set with this data provider, let's see what we get. And it doesn't update Apple, which makes sense for this data provider. And let's try an update with the DAX data set. Now, while that's happening, I just want to mention that updating isn't really necessary when you request data for a strategy run. WealthLab will automatically update the data. But if you want to update the data first and check it, for example, you can click on the last date, sort it, and you can see that, for example, I have a symbol here that didn't update, and we'll have to look into that one. And that could be one reason why you might want to update in the data manager to check your data before you trade or do a back test. Another exception that I want to point out is, for example, if I click on these world indices, you can see that the Yahoo is only giving me a daily option here. Now, Yahoo's the provider, the dataset provider for all of these datasets, but when I click on a US dataset, I happen to have data there, you can see that I'm getting all the different options for scales. Now that's because although Yahoo is, as I said, the dataset provider, it's an unlinked dataset, and we're going to get into what's linked and unlinked next in this video. It basically means that any data provider can provide data for that dataset. But that is one exception, the US datasets for Yahoo that are unlinked. Okay, and before we get off this datasets view here, I want to mention the data tool. It's actually a set of 3 different tools for data truncation, to be able to find inactive symbols, and also data integrity, which might point out where some problems in your data could be. I don't want to go through this too much, but as always, if you hit F1 and you go through the data manager, we're on the datasets tab, and you can see there's information on how to use the data tool, data truncation, inactive symbols, and data integrity. It's all there, so you can investigate that on your own. One of the most important buttons on this view is the new dataset, create a new dataset button, which you can also hit from the data panel over here, and you get the same dialog. Now, to create a new dataset, that's to be able to create a dataset of ad hoc symbols, any kind of symbol set that you might want to put together. Generally, it's a collection of similar items, but you can actually mix them if you want. So when you create a new dataset, you're going to have to give it a name. Let's just call it my new dataset. And I'm using, let's see, looks like I have the caps lock on, my new dataset, my new DS. Okay, and there's 2 options for creating a dataset, unlinked and data provider linked. An unlinked dataset doesn't have a particular provider associated with it, and lets WealthLab ask all the providers in the order of precedence that you set in the historical providers tab, which we're going to go over next. So there's no particular or specific provider associated with an unlinked dataset. Not so for a data provider linked dataset. When you select a linked dataset, or even if you just select a provider down here, you can see that it's going to select a linked dataset. In this case, our dataset is going to be associated with this provider, and that's the first place that WealthLab will try to get data when you use that dataset. Okay, so the red marks here mean that I don't have that one set up yet. So let's just, well, first of all, let's do 2. We'll create an unlinked dataset. We'll just create a few symbols, Apple, whatever, Meta, IBM. Okay, Apple, Meta, IBM. I'm going to copy that because we're going to do that again. So that's my first data set. As you can see, it was added here in my data sets. And here's my the 3 symbols. I've got some data for that already because I must have downloaded data with one of the providers already. Now let's do that again, and let's create a linked provider. And what we're going to do is create a QData provider. Copy those in there, and we'll call this one QMy new dataset. The Q, which just lets me know that it's the QData provider, but of course its icon is shown there, so we know it's the QData provider. And when I click on the QData provider, you can see it hasn't been updated yet. So right away you can see that there's a difference here. And we're going to get to a more important difference later. So first of all, let's prove that we don't have to update data here. Let's go ahead and go over my data tree and double click on Meta here. And you can see that Meta came up, and at the bottom of the chart here, you can see that the data source was QData. It's QData because I asked for it from the QData data source. However, we're going to click on Meta in this my new data source, which is the Unlinked provider. If I click on Meta, notice that now I got probably something that looks pretty close to the same chart, but it's actually from wealth data this time. And we're going to see the reason for that. It's right now. If you go to the historical providers, this view gives you the list of all the historical providers that you have installed, and the ones that you have checked are the ones that you've enabled. Not only that, and this might be pretty close to the way it looks on your installation also, but something that you can do is reorder these in any order that you like. For example, if I wanted to put Yahoo at the top, that means that I prefer Yahoo data over wealth data. So when I go back to let's go back to my chart, and let's click on Apple. WealthLab is going to ask for data from Yahoo now in this unlinked provider because it's unlinked, and it's going to go through the order of the providers that I have listed here from top to bottom. Since Yahoo was at the top, that's where the data comes from. If it wasn't able to get data for Apple from Yahoo, it would have gone to wealth data and then so on. But now, once again, QData was, I think, the third one, but let's go ahead and click on Apple. In the QData dataset, you can see that the data source is from QData, once again, because it's the linked provider. So I think we've driven that home enough. I hope that all makes sense. Okay, let's go back to the data manager. And something else that you can do in this view, for example, you can see that the providers that need an extra settings to set them up, usually you need to provide an API key or something like this, usually as API key. For example, Tiingo, you can see that I already have my API key set up, so there isn't an edit icon there. Now, Tiingo is one of the providers in the data extensions, and if you're looking for some free intraday data, Tiingo could be a good choice for that. Let's go ahead and set up a data provider. Oops, I don't want to do that. Let's go back to datasets, hit a new dataset tree, and say, let's call this one TMyDS. And let's create a Tiingo data provider really quickly, a dataset that is, and some other symbols. How about some symbols that I'm looking for, and now you can see that we have more options for data. So let's go ahead and just update some 30-minute data here. Let's see how Tiingo does for us. Looks like I already had WBA done. Okay, and well, okay, it looks like we got data for 30-minute charts, got 23,000 bars. It looked like we got less for this one. Okay, yeah, this one didn't update all the way, so Tiingo, let's go ahead and hit update dataset again, give that another try. Some of these data providers have rate limiting, and so you might have to try a couple times with something like this when you're asking for a lot of data. And once again, if you wanted to do a little bit more configuration, you can add symbols, change the name, however you like. And there you have it for the data sets. Okay, historical providers. Oh, something I probably should have gone over is when you're setting up a new provider like Tiingo, you might want to use the loading test bed. So just to see if you have a connection, you would just type a symbol in there. Let's try something new. NVIDIA, I don't know if I had that one. And let's go for 30-minute data, load the data. And you can see that some bars came back, so that means the provider is set up correctly, and we got a connection. Okay. Same thing for streaming providers. Streaming providers also have a test bed. Let's try that. I didn't know that Tiingo had streaming. And it looks like it is returning some data. So, and yep, you can see how the data is updating there for Tiingo. So Tiingo is a intraday provider. Yahoo also has intraday. Now all these providers, all these free providers don't give you they're not tick-to-tick streaming providers like something like IQ Feed. Okay, back to historical providers. We have a few more options to go over. You can update all the, specific provider, all the providers that you have checked, and we have a symbol mappings dialog. Okay, so this applies to the provider that you have selected. So, for example, if you're using, well, as you can see for the example here, if you're using BRK-B and Tiingo uses BRK-B without the dot, you can create a mapping for that. So that way when you request a BRK.B, you can see how it changes to BRK-B for Tiingo. And those mappings are saved with the provider. Okay, and the last button here is the data preferences, which we've seen before. We've talked about loading data into charts. The one that applies here is the data corrections. Let's see, this first option is if an update changes by more than a certain percentage, you would refresh the entire series, okay? This other one is refresh whenever a new split or dividend occurs. And another one is to allow data corrections from historical providers. So you might want to check all those. It depends on what your preferences are. Okay. And the last thing to go over on the Historical Providers tab are the right-click options here. So if you click on the right-click on a provider, you get three options. Perform bulk update, which would update all of the symbols that you've already downloaded for all the data sets for that provider. Delete local files would be, sometimes this is actually a good option for wealth data to quickly refresh everything that you have so that you have all the latest updates and corrections just in case you've missed any. So that'll delete your files, and so that when you request the data again, it's actually refreshed. The clear internal tracking request info is something you can click at any time, and it's useful if for some reason in a WealthLab session you've requested data from a provider and it couldn't return it at that moment. WealthLab won't request that symbol in that scale from that provider again because it already did it once and it failed. So to speed things up, it skips over that. If for some reason at that moment the provider couldn't return the data, you can come back here, clear internal requests, and that resets WealthLab so that it'll request data from that provider again. And that should do it for the Historical Providers tab. Okay, the next tab is Event Providers. Now events are things like dividends and splits, news, fundamentals, chart patterns, news, anything that's really not open, high, low, close volume information that you can see in your chart, and your strategies can actually act on these data. This is kind of a large topic, so we don't want to get into this right now, but the one thing I do want to mention is that you shouldn't select a bunch of these just to have them selected. That will slow your data updates and your strategies and your back tests. It will slow it down quite a bit. So just select the ones that you want to use or that you need in that moment. Wealth data, dividend splits, for example, is pretty fast. You might want to select dividends and splits for Yahoo too, but the idea is to only select the ones that you want to have active for any particular test, because it can slow things down quite a bit. If you're seeing that you're getting very, very slow data loading for your back tests, this is the place to look. Start deselecting the ones that you don't need. Now, streaming providers, we touched on this already. If you're just looking for quotes and things like that to get an idea where things are for the day, these free providers are probably good enough for that. But if you want to actually drive intraday charts, you'll need a provider. Possibly one of your broker providers will be good enough for that, or IQ Feed, which is the kind of the premier provider that we have connected. Although I hear that Alpaca's paid service is quite good also. But for more about providers, we have an article that I'm going to put a link in there in our blog. So you can read about streaming and intraday providers in our blog. And finally, to close this tool out, we have something that we started, but the scheduled update. So if I started an update before, and you can see the update status going here. But you can schedule updates. The tool itself, if you just schedule the update, it's not really convenient because you have to leave this window open. But if you go into the help and click on the scheduled update link here, you can actually use the Windows Task Scheduler to schedule an update, to launch WealthLab and to update your data sets. And you can read all about exactly how to do that right there. Okay, so I hope we got something out of this one. Creating data sets, and the historical providers tab is probably something that you'll come back to quite a bit. Maybe if you have just a few providers that you need, you'll set them up the way you want, and then you won't have to worry about it anymore. But if you're like me, you're deselecting and selecting these and reordering them all the time to get exactly the data that you're looking for a particular test. So there you have it. We know how to work with our data now, and we've talked about indicators and charts, and I think the next lesson we're going to get into building some strategies and doing some backtests. Thanks for coming. See you then.